Kia ora. Thanks for tuning in to the We Fucking Love Startups podcast, brought to you by Talent Army.
Hey everyone, Troy Hammond here, and welcome back or welcome to the We Fucking Love Startups podcast. Today's actually a special series that we're going to be pushing out over the next couple of months. We're currently sitting at the Sunrise Festival or the Sunrise Conference by Blackbird. It's a conference for founders to hear the stories of other founders and really help network, uplift, read the playbook and hear the playbook from other founders. So it's quite a unique series that we're pushing out. They're going to be shorter episodes, 30-minute episodes, really amazing guests, and so I hope you really enjoy them. On this episode, we're actually chatting with the co-founder of Blackbird. The reason why we're here today, Niki Scevak. Niki is the co-founder of Blackbird VC firm, which is the company that's put on this amazing festival today, Sunrise. And so I'm going to chat with him about how and why he founded Blackbird, what Blackbird does, and then what today is all about. Strap in and enjoy. Obviously, you've had an interesting career yourself, man. Talk me through, how did you get to Blackbird? What was the pre-story?
I had done 2 startups myself. Had loved technology all through my high school years. Did technology at university, sort of like half computer science, half business.
Smart.
Did a startup in university, and it's really only famous for the person I did it with, which is Mike Cannon-Brookes. He's only done 2 companies, but you would like to have done the other company, not the company that we did together.
What was it out of interest?
It's called the Bookmark Box. It was back in 1998, allowed people to manage and share their bookmarks online. Back then you had a home computer, a work computer, and all different computers where your work was not synced up by the cloud. If people can remember way back then. So we grew it to 50,000 users. As people were bookmarking, also a problem at the time was like web spam. So you used to sort of search for online casino or something, and the person who put online casino in their title came up first. And so this was the rise of Google, and web spam was still a problem back then. So we were starting to sort of point the Bookmark Box towards it as a search engine, and someone bookmarking a site as a signal of trust or a signal of quality, that this page or this site was noteworthy. And the business itself lasted, I think, 18 months from start to finish. Had that surge of users and a couple million bookmarks, and we ended up selling it to a US company. So it was almost like that was our university degree, doing the Bookmark Box versus the actual content of the university degree that we were studying during the day, and set me on a path of, this is what I wanted to do with my life. I did another startup. I lived in New York, and it was okay for a while, sort of a moderate success, a 4-hour work week, Tim Ferriss style success of a business. And then was moving back to Australia, and was keen to start angel investing myself. As I explored that, when I came back to Australia in 2009, 2010, I realized that I could speed up my learning by batching it all together, by bringing together the community of founders that had done successful technology companies. And that was Startmate, and that was the beginning of me falling in love with being an investor rather than a founder or an operator.
Yeah.
And
how did you make that switch? Because it's hard, right, when you can't go all in, right?
For me, it was actually more natural, and the unnatural state was the sort of founder focus maniacally on one single thing. Even in parallel to university, I'd always loved the philosophy of investing. Like, people think of investing as spreadsheets versus the investing is much more psychology and why people do certain things or why consumers do certain things. And that was always so fascinating to me. So I'd loved Warren Buffett. I'd loved Charlie Munger. I'd always read hedge fund letters about sort of picking apart businesses and understanding them, and that was super interesting to me. So I'd done that separately to the startups that I had started, and then as I began Startmate, they all sort of came together and felt so much more interesting and satisfying and exciting. And Startmate in the beginning was not Startmate as it is now. It was sort of a couple months of the year, 2 days a week during those couple months for me. So it was like a part-time endeavor that led me to say, this is actually what I want to do with my life. And so after that moment, Rick Baker and Bill Barty and myself founded Blackbird in 2012, and that was the...
Were you guys involved, were you in the community of Startmate?
Yeah, through Startmate, Bill was one of the original mentors, and through Startmate, I'd also met Rick, one of the companies that had gone through Startmate was in the US. Rick was at MLC investing their money into venture capital funds, so into Sequoia and Benchmark and Excel and so on and so forth. And so he was based over in the US at the time and had met Stuart and Anthony of a company called Grabble, who said, hey, you should meet Niki when you go back to Sydney. And then we met, and we formed Blackbird.
Rest is history. So many people I know met at Startmate, through Startmate, so many connections. It's phenomenal, right?
It is a magical community.
Yeah, you must look back and feel pretty proud, man.
So proud, yeah.
Because there's the tangible stuff that you've invested in, but there's also the stuff that you could look at and say, I probably had something to do with that just by helping connect people, right?
Yeah, and I've also realized that over the course of the 11 years of Blackbird and 13 years of Startmate, the joy of the business is seeing someone go from nobody to somebody. And there's such a thin line between the two in the world of startups, and just the sense of pride that I've gotten and joy I've gotten from those stories of people starting out that did succeed, companies that did build into great businesses, people within Startmate team itself or Blackbird team itself of starting their careers with Startmate or Blackbird and succeeding, and that's the joy of the business.
What's the one that you invested or that didn't work out that you wish did? Is there one there that you're like,
It's this one is not clear cut. It's not black and white, but we invested in the first and every round of a company called Zoox, which is a robo-taxi. The idea of a fleet of vehicles that are completely autonomous, and people, you can't buy them, but you can hail one like you can hail an Uber, and they're driving around.
I just finished Elon's
excellent.
Okay, so I've been reading that all weekend. Yeah.
So a potentially incredible business instead of instead of Tesla selling you a vehicle and Tesla getting 20 or 30% of that one-off sales price, you might have a vehicle that's out there every day and earning revenue every year, and it can last 5 or 6 years. And the economics of that robotaxi business are completely different to the economics of a electric vehicle business of selling you a car. So potentially one of the greatest businesses in the world. Zoox made incredible progress. Zoox had
were they LiDAR? Was it LiDAR or camera vision?
LiDAR
Mixed.
and heavy compute and so on. So again, this is an interesting question in 2023 as to does AI need lots of compute? Does it need lots of sensor fusion versus the Tesla bet is with a rudimentary sort of amount of compute and just the camera, you can actually get to the same level of skill.
And the data of 15 years of cameras on Teslas, right?
So that will be proven out in the next couple of years. But the freshness of the vision of not only its super hard technology, getting a car to drive itself is again mind-bogglingly complex. But with Zoox, it was the design of the vehicle and the design of the consumer service. Again, the thoughtfulness around the business model, what it would do to cities. Like if you think about even just streets, you have the outer lanes are just parked cars. I think in LA, someone did a analysis of LA, and it was like 30% of LA is dedicated to parking, whether it's like driveways and
solves
garages.
Housing crisis, solves lots of problems.
Basically opens up a city. So all of these things, and Zoox raised more than $1 billion. It made is making a whole host of progress. It was sold to Amazon for a positive financial result for investors and the team in 2020. But that's a company even though it was 3 years ago, that's a company I still think about every day, and still think, I think in the next couple of years, people sort of rode the hype curve of self-driving vehicles and got too excited. As with anything, takes longer, costs more. But the next couple of years, it does feel like in 2023, we're at the sort of starting line of self-driving cars and robo-taxis, and over the next couple of years, we'll find out, if all of those kind of business dreams come true, and Zoox versus Waymo versus Cruise versus others. So that's a company that I still think about, even though Blackbird is not an investor in the company anymore.
Well, and there's multiple things there, right? Like I imagine that's going to be the first, like multi-trillion-dollar company, right? Like in terms of like robotaxi, but also like that's a real super hard problem to solve, right? And that's fascinating to me. Yeah,
and fascinating and super hard problem to solve is almost a honeypot for all of the best people in the world, whether it's the people, the technologists required to do it and to join the company as employees, or investors to give you the capital and the best valuation, or partners to work with, or cities and governments to change the laws to make it legal for the service to operate. There's something about those attributes is almost like a honeypot that people get excited about and people make happen because it is so interesting and because it is so hard. That's actually a higher chance of success. Like again, it doesn't intuitively make sense, but if you do something that is worthwhile, it has a higher chance of succeeding versus if you're doing something unambitious or not worthwhile. No one wants to work for you. No one wants to fund you. No one wants to change the laws to make it legal. And so there's something about these ambitious visions that have a network effect around them almost.
So tell me about the Australian startup ecosystem, right? Like I feel like what we feel in New Zealand is the money that's coming out of Australia now is really helping flourish the New Zealand ecosystem. And I feel the same as an Aussie that moved here 16 years ago. It was fucking hard, 20 years ago in the startup world in Australia to get access to capital and to have credibility to build a business from this side of the world. It just seems like we're just like almost Murphy's Law, just getting easier and easier and easier again, right?
Yep.
So like, how have you found that since from starting to now in terms of like the money going around, the ecosystem maturity?
Yeah, I think what's the most important thing to understand is it's the lighthouse companies that create the ecosystems. It's the Canvas and Atlassians, or it's the Zeros and Rocket Labs. And once you have those great success stories, you have this circle of life of all of the investors in those companies are successful, and so they raise more and more capital, invest in the next generation.
Yeah.
All of the employees who went through that journey go on to found companies, and I think Rocket Lab is such an incredible
so many people have come out of Rocket Lab
that have produced a PayPal level of alumni company founders out of their journey. And so from a sort of what comes first, I think it's that lighthouse company, and the lighthouse company, in Australia's case, Atlassian raised no money until 8 years into its life, and it actually didn't even raise money into the company. It was just a secondary round. And so you kind of need these unlikely results of like no capital, but lots of success. In Zero's case, they raised their seed round on the New Zealand Stock Exchange, which is like, you're not going to find that in any advice on podcasts or conferences like today. And so you need these unlikely events to happen, but then the snowball starts to roll downwards and gather steam, and you get the circle of life of employees founding companies, employees joining other startups early on because they can sacrifice the salary because they made a lot of money in the lighthouse company. As I mentioned, the investor ecosystem. Some of the early employees of the lighthouse companies go on to be angel investors. It's this circle of life that compounds, and you kind of wake up in 10 years and it's like, oh my God, this is a world-class community.
Yeah, so just hard work.
And patience. A lot of people just want like the instant coffee. They want sort of, how do we have an ecosystem, tomorrow, versus to know that it is completely inevitable that New Zealand will have a flourishing, already has, but to 100 times bigger degree in 20 years, in 30 years, simply because of this compounding force that is already underway.
Yeah, awesome, man. So then if we're looking at these lighthouse companies, before they become a lighthouse company, how do you pick them? Like, can you talk us through, like, what are you looking for in an earlier stage company to invest?
Yeah, ambition. I think the other beautiful thing about the last 10 years is the internet has allowed people from anywhere in the world to create something, or to try to be the best in the world. So it doesn't matter that you're in New Zealand or Australia or Sweden or Canada. You can create these generational companies from anywhere, where previously it was move to Silicon Valley. The people who fund you are only going to fund you if they can ride their bicycle to you, or whatever the quote was. Whereas that is not true, and it's even you have an advantage of building your company in New Zealand versus Silicon Valley, because you have to pay $300,000 for a test engineer that's going to leave you for Yahoo in 6 months, and just so hard, so expensive, and so hard to retain talent, versus all of the incredible technical talent and product talent that Australia and New Zealand have, and you can access it because they're. Do you want to work for a bank, or do you want to work for an interesting mission that a startup is going after? So I think
ambition. How do you define ambition in someone, like confidence and ambition? What are the traits? Is it just that they're thinking global? They've got a really good understanding of how they're going to go to market with that? Or?
Yeah, want to be the best in the world. Want to make an impact, like not to be a piece of a puzzle or a little cog in a wheel. They actually have this high sense of responsibility of like to bring about the change. They won't stop until they've brought about the change, and that change often will take decades. And so it's this long-term horizon of the mission is their life's work. It's so natural for that person to be chasing after that particular problem or space. And I'd say the prototypical example obviously is Mel from Canva, who taught graphic design at university and then started Fusion Books, which was a yearbook business, and then started Canva. And it's pretty easy to answer that question of, do you feel like she's doing her life's work?
Which she's been all in on it forever.
And look, she even always says she's 1% done, to the state now where it's a sort of meme within the company that surely they're a little bit more than 1% done, but the mission is you could spend your whole life and still not complete it, and that's the kinds of problems you're hoping to find founders solving, and then startups. Most startups fail, unfortunately. So most will not work out. But for those few startups that do work out, you need something more than money as a motivator. Because if they do work out, if you've created a product that customers love and you're scaling rapidly, you'll actually have lots of people who want to buy your company. And so it's those who are doing their life's work that have that long-term vision of they're only a little bit into the vision coming true, that sense of responsibility, that sense of like they know it's going to be 1,000 times more valuable because they're only at the beginning of the journey. You need all of that for that person to say no to the acquisition offers that will inevitably come from something that is succeeding. So once people do see something succeed, you'll get an acquisition offer at $50 million or $100 million or $1 billion or $10 billion. And the prototypical example there might be where Yahoo tried to acquire Facebook for $1 billion, and Mark Zuckerberg called a board meeting and said, "Don't think we really need to talk about this in detail. We're obviously saying no," which sounds silly to people, but actually is not so silly from a evidence point of view of how fast Facebook was growing, both usage-wise and revenue-wise, but also because he had that vision in his head that he was only 1% of the way through that. Where Facebook, the offer was for $1 billion, Facebook itself is now $1 trillion. So it was off by a factor of 1,000. Yeah,
interesting. And so what do you think New Zealand startups can do in this market now, right? Because it's obviously the landscape's changed a little bit. It's harder to get money. I love it. It's gone back to sort of old school days of just bootstrapping and going out there and finding some customers, right? But what nuggets of information can you pass on?
I think that's timeless, and that didn't change in 2021. I think 2021 maybe brought a layer of people in it for the theatrics of like winning an award or being 30 under 30 or what have you. But that sort of activity is always noise, and I think the successful companies in any year of history are always those ones that have that authentic connection to the problem, that care deeply about the customer, care deeply about the transformation taking place, or that responsibility that the change happens, and that authenticity never changed. You just had this extra layer of theatrics around it for a little time. So I don't think, again, whatever year it is, always focus on solving a problem, repeat happy customers, transform their lives, or their working lives. Don't help them a little bit, make something that is truly special. I think that's timeless, whether it is this year or a couple of years ago. I also think people tend to think, oh, what is New Zealand's competitive advantage, or what are the particular areas that New Zealanders should focus on? I think about it as whatever the world throws up in terms of business opportunities. It's like the Olympics, where there's always going to be an entrant from New Zealand that has a chance of the gold medal. And New Zealand's not going to win every, even have a participant in every event, but there's just impossible to predict. And for the person who has that chance of winning the gold medal, that's really what Blackbird seeks to be, to help with our belief and the capital and support and community and so on. That's what's interesting. So it's always driven by the founders' ideas rather than the investors' ideas.
Yeah, awesome. I might just move your mic just that way a bit. Yeah, perfect.
Cool.
So, I mean, Blackbird, we're here today, right? Obviously at Sunrise. Your love letter to the sort of industry, I think, is the term that you use, which I think is fantastic. I'll steal that for this podcast and say that instead. But the things that I really like and respect about Blackbird is that there's a lot of stuff that you do outside of the traditional just giving the money. And so, talk us through, can you give us a bit more of an understanding of who Blackbird is and who are and what you're doing?
So I guess in Silicon Valley, as an investment firm, you can be fortunate enough or lazy enough to just sort of throw your line in the river and the fish will come past and
wait for them to turn to Sand Hill Road, right?
Versus, I think in Australia and New Zealand, you need to help create the ecosystem. And creating the ecosystem, at least for me, is helping connect founders with other founders. And the idea of the Sunrise is for successful founders to retell the early days of their journey, or to pass on the lessons of what happened at key moments in the company's life. And that idea of founders helping founders and very real conversations, not I'm crushing it and everything's so positive. And I think that spirit is very much Blackbird itself. When outside of the Sunrise in our relationships, we view sort of when we started Blackbird, Rick and I in particular were not very successful ourselves. So it wasn't ever, hey, we're the expert, here are the answers. It was always, let's build a community of founders that have an interest in helping the next generation. So it was always done with that community at the heart of what we do. And I still think, the most powerful help comes founders helping other founders, but I would also narrow that down into founders helping other founders who are at a very similar stage or one step ahead. There's just a freshness of knowledge of, if you're at a similar point in time, a similar stage of development at a particular point in time, that is the golden advice. That is the best thing you could do versus the the founder that built their company when Google ads were 2 cents per click, or when SEO was done in a certain way, or the VC that used to be a founder, but 15 years later, the sort of knowledge has gone a bit stale. There's definitely knowledge that is timeless, and I would say knowledge that is timeless around how to build a company and culture and people and so on. There's a lot of timeless knowledge, but there is a lot of freshness to knowledge, and so therefore, founders helping other founders at a similar stage, one step ahead, in a sort of fresh time context. I think that's the magic, and that's what we try to replicate at Blackbird with each of our relationships and each of the kind of key moments of the companies that we get to be involved in.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Yeah, hat tip, absolute hat tip. It's been great so far, and everything that you guys have done since coming to New Zealand, quite a few years ago. Hey, can we talk about numbers in terms of numbers that you've invested in companies that you're working with?
Yeah, we have invested in a little more than 100 companies in total. We have raised 5 different funds. The first one was in 2012 was a $29 million fund. The most recent one last year was a bit more than $1 billion. So the funds have dramatically scaled up. And I would say that was in reaction to the VC world. I'm not sure why, but is structured around this idea that you're a specialist at a particular round. Like I'm a seed fund that invests in seed rounds, and that never really made sense to us. Like, why would you invest in a company before you knew it was successful? And as soon as you know it's successful, you deliberately not invest in it. Doesn't make any sense. And so as we started out, invested in the seed rounds of Canva, Safety Culture, Culture Amp, Zoox, Propeller, et cetera. In our second fund, we actually raised 2 vehicles. We raised another seed fund so we could keep investing in new companies, and then we raised a follow-on fund that is a bigger pool of capital that can invest in those opportunities of those existing portfolio companies. And so particularly if a company succeeds, you can invest a lot of capital into it. And the first investment in Canva was $250,000, but we've invested $270 million just into Canva, for instance. And the idea would be to replicate that for every generational company to come from Australia and New Zealand, to be there right at the beginning, to first invest before a company has product or revenue. And if it is fortunate enough to enjoy the success of a generational company, to be able to invest hundreds of millions of dollars into that company over its life.
Awesome. And for me, what stage should founders be reaching out to VCs?
For Blackbird, right at the beginning, I think that's the biggest misconception about Blackbird is like, let's wait until we have some level of traction or some level of proof. So
I'm scribbling something on a notepad at this conference, and then texting you at the same time saying, "Hey, check out this."
That is the sweet spot. That is for all of the new companies that we invest in. That's the average stage that we invest in them. Occasionally, we will invest in a company a bit later on. If we made a mistake in saying no in the first round, hopefully you can correct that in the second round.
Well, you just had the biggest ever seed in New Zealand's history, right, with Kiki.
And so again, it's a humbling business, and you get it wrong. So, but the culture within the team and the culture of accountability is, did we invest in that very first round? And everything we do in terms of the team and the culture around the team is about finding that company right at the beginning.
Interesting. And then, so with that money, what are you hoping? What's your involvement at that seed level? Are you hands off in the early days, or are you active?
I think there's the beginning is a special place to help form the DNA of a company, to help nurture the culture and the rhythm. I think also Silicon Valley is great in that if you go there and just the pace of progress and the pace of setting habits in the beginning has a compound effect over a company's life. So I think setting a rhythm of the company, helping it find and define its culture. I would say VCs can help with, you kind of do 2 things in a startup. You build a product and you build a company. I'd say VCs can probably help 0 with building a product, but they can help quite a lot with building a company. And so that tends to be the area we focus our attention on. In terms of the frequency, it's all up to the personality of the founder. If they don't want to, you don't want someone calling you every day. We're not going to call you every day. If people do want that in special moments of a company's life, absolutely we'll be there. I'd say typically it's catching up with the company once a month or once every 2 months in the beginning. And also in the beginning, if you're building a product, you haven't released a product, that's the thing to do, not post-product where all of these other issues become a lot more important and so on. So in the beginning, I think it's a special place because the wet cement of culture and DNA to be part of that is special, and before things have hardened and harder to change down the line, and love the every moment we get to spend.
Yeah, thank you, man. I could sit here and talk to you for another 2 hours, Niki, but we've got you for half an hour, so I appreciate your time, and I know you've got to get out there and do your thing and chat with founders, talking to founders and helping founders. But hey, just thank you on behalf of the ecosystem for everything that you guys are doing. Thank you for the event. It's as I said before, it's fantastic out there. Like the vibe out there is phenomenal, and it's for me, it's almost like a high school reunion. Walking and I'm seeing all of the people again, but everyone's just been saying how just so easy to network here and walk around and meet people and chat with people, and you can see people are running around trying to catch up with their friends and colleagues and heroes. And so this is what an event should be for me. Make it easy for people to chat to each other and then have some phenomenal speakers. They're going to pass down their wisdom. And so thanks so much for coming on, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for having me on the show.
Super interesting guy, Niki. I think I could have chatted with him for another 2 hours and been pretty happy, but we're doing small podcast episodes today. Hope you enjoyed it. You should be able to do this on your run. A lot of people complaining that podcasts are going for an hour and they can't run that far. Half an hour sessions designed just for you. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed hearing Niki's story and hearing the story of Blackbird. Really thankful for everything that they're doing in the industry. We've got a few more of these episodes to come out, and so enjoy.
This podcast is produced by John Otaka from Empire Films.